The weight of the leather-bound Bible pressed against Micah Towner's chest, a physical anchor for his racing heart. He clutched it tighter, feeling the cold, embossed cross beneath his fingers. Tears threatened at the corners of his eyes, but he blinked them back fiercely, unwilling to let them fall. Not here, not with the choir still visible through the doorway behind him. His white surplice felt suddenly too large, drowning his 11-year-old frame in cotton waves as he stood alone in the shadowed antechamber of St. Barnabas Episcopal Church. "You need to understand your place, Micah." Pastor Wesley Thornhill's voice still echoed in his head. "The choir is about unity, not individuals seeking attention." But that wasn't why he'd spoken up. It wasn't about attention at all. Micah glanced back at the other children in their matching white robes, rehearsing for tomorrow's Sunday service. Their voices rose in practiced harmony, floating through the cavernous stone church. The afternoon light streamed through the stained glass, casting jeweled shadows across their faces, faces that had deliberately turned away when he'd been escorted out, all except for Naomi Parker's. The smallest chorister had offered a furtive, sympathetic glance before Charlotte Wilcott, the choir director, had noticed and sharpened her gaze at the girl. "Either wait for your mother in the sanctuary or wait outside," Charlotte had instructed Micah with finality before returning to the remaining choir members. But the rehearsal must continue. The great wooden doors of the church felt miles away, and Micah wasn't ready to step outside and admit defeat. Instead, he slipped into the empty sanctuary, his footsteps echoing across the polished floor. The magnificent ceiling arched above him, centuries of faith pressed into stone and wood. Somewhere up there, Micah wondered, was God listening? Could he hear the truth even when others refused to? Sliding into the back pew, Micah opened his Bible to where the ribbon marked Proverbs. His grandfather had always told him to seek wisdom when troubled. The words swam before his eyes as the choir's voices drifted in, voices he was no longer part of. "I don't understand," he whispered, his words barely stirring the air. "I was only trying to do what's right." The events of the past week tumbled through his mind, like leaves caught in an autumn gust. It had begun with such excitement. Micah had been selected as one of the soloists for the upcoming Easter service, a rare honor for someone who'd only joined St. Barnabas 6 months ago after his family moved to Clearwell. His mother had been so proud, calling his grandparents long distance to share the news. Then came Wednesday's rehearsal and the discovery that changed everything. The church door creaked open, interrupting his thoughts. Micah quickly wiped his eyes, expecting to see his mother's concerned face. Instead, Josiah Reed, the church custodian, shuffled in with his well-worn cart of cleaning supplies. The older man paused when he spotted Micah. "Well now, young sir, rehearsal's still going on in the choir room. Why are you sitting alone in here?" Micah hesitated. Josiah had always been kind to him, offering peppermints from seemingly endless pockets and asking about his schoolwork. The custodian's weathered face held no judgment, just genuine curiosity beneath his salt and pepper hair. "I'm not in the choir anymore," Micah finally said, the words catching in his throat. Josiah's eyebrows rose as he leaned his mop against a nearby pew and eased his lanky frame down beside Micah. His coveralls smelled of lemon polish and decades of devotion to the church. "That's news to me," he said, "and unexpected news at that. Your voice is a gift, reminds me of clear water over river stones." He paused, studying Micah's face. "There's a story here, I suspect." The kindness in the man's voice loosened something in Micah's chest. "I found something wrong with the charity money," he said, in a rushed whisper, leaning closer to Josiah. "The choir fund. We raised over $3,000 at the winter concert for the Children's Hospital, but I overheard Miss Charlotte telling Pastor Wesley they only collected $2,000. I asked about it, and now they say I'm not a good fit for the choir culture." Saying it aloud made Micah's stomach twist. His mother had taught him to speak up when things weren't right, but she'd never warned him how lonely it would feel. Josiah was quiet for a long moment, his calloused hands resting on his knees. That's quite an accusation, son. Perhaps you misheard. I didn't. Micah's fingers tightened around his Bible. I volunteer at the concert reception desk with Mr. Hartman. I saw the donation ledger. Miss Charlotte made me and Naomi count it twice to be sure. Naomi Parker, the little one with the red hair. Micah nodded. She knows too, but she's afraid to say anything. Her mom works for Miss Charlotte at the music school. Josiah exhaled slowly, the weight of his sigh seeming to fill the empty church. Truth's a heavy burden sometimes, especially for young shoulders. He gazed up at the stained glass depicting the Good Shepherd. But the Lord sees what's done in darkness. Always has. Always will. So I just wait for God to fix it? Micah couldn't keep the edge from his voice. While they use the money that was supposed to help sick kids? Not exactly. Josiah's voice had a quiet strength that made Micah look up. God often works through people willing to stand firm. The question is, what's the right way to stand? Before Micah could answer, the side door opened and his mother appeared, her nurse's scrubs still on from her hospital shift. Bethany Towner's concerned eyes found her son immediately, and Micah knew someone had called her. "Micah, honey!" She hurried over, her practical shoes squeaking slightly on the polished floor. "Charlotte just called me." "What's happened?" Josiah stood respectfully, nodding to Bethany. "Afternoon, Miss Towner. I was just keeping your boy company." "Thank you, Josiah." She smiled briefly at the custodian before turning back to her son. "Micah, Charlotte said there was some sort of disagreement." Micah looked between his mother and Josiah, torn between unburdening himself and protecting her from yet another problem. Since Dad's deployment overseas 3 months ago, she'd been working double shifts to make ends meet. The last thing she needed was church drama. "It's nothing, Mum. He faltered. "Your son has integrity," Josiah said simply. "A rare quality these days, especially when it comes with a cost." Something in Josiah's words seemed to alert Bethany. She sat beside Micah, taking his hand in hers. "Tell me what happened. The whole truth." So he did. When he finished, his mother's expression had transformed from concern to a controlled anger Micah recognized from the rare times someone threatened her patient's well-being. "Are you absolutely certain about the amounts?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am. I wrote them in my choir notebook, and Mr. Hartman initialed it. He always has us double-check donations." Bethany stood, smoothing her scrubs with determined hands. "Wait here with Josiah. I need to have a word with Pastor Wesley." "Mom, no!" Micah started to protest, but she was already striding toward the choir room, her posture straight as a sentinel. Josiah chuckled softly. "Your mother reminds me of Esther approaching the king. Courage runs in your family, it seems." Micah wasn't sure about courage. Right now his insides felt like the time he'd eaten bad cafeteria chili, churning and unpredictable. "What if they don't believe her either?" he asked. "Truth has a way of making itself heard," Josiah replied, settling back into the pew. "Sometimes it takes one voice, sometimes many, but it always finds a way." He glanced at the Bible in Micah's hands. "Proverbs?" Micah nodded. "Try chapter 12, verse 19. Micah turned the thin pages carefully until he found it, reading aloud in a whisper, "Truthful lips endure forever, but a lying tongue is but for a moment." Josiah nodded. "One of my favorites." The minutes stretched on, punctuated only by the distant sound of the choir and the occasional creak of the ancient building settling. Micah found himself turning to more passages about truth and integrity, reading them silently as Josiah hummed an old hymn beside him. Nearly 30 minutes later, the sanctuary doors opened, and Pastor Wesley entered alongside Bethany and Theodore Hartman, the church treasurer. Their faces were solemn, but Micah's mother had a determined set to her jaw that he recognized. It was the same expression she wore when advocating for a patient. "Micah," Pastor Wesley said, his deep voice resonating in the empty sanctuary, "Mr. Hartman has some questions about the winter concert donations." Theodore Hartman, a retired accountant with wire-rimmed glasses and precisely combed silver hair, approached with a leather ledger. I understand you and Naomi helped count the donations, young man? Micah swallowed hard, nodding. Yes, sir. We counted twice. And you recorded the total as $3,142. Yes, sir. You initialed it right here. Micah flipped open his choir notebook, pointing to the neat entry with Mr. Hartman's T.H. beside it. The treasurer examined it, then looked gravely at Pastor Wesley. This matches my personal record, which I keep separate from the official books. There is indeed a discrepancy. Pastor Wesley's face grew troubled. I see. He looked at Micah with new eyes. Why didn't you come to me directly with this concern, son? Micah glanced at his mother, drawing courage from her nod. I tried, Pastor, last Sunday after service. But you said Miss Charlotte handles all choir matters, and I should trust her experience. A flash of recognition crossed the pastor's face, followed quickly by discomfort. I recall the conversation differently, but that's not important now. What matters is investigating this properly. It certainly is, Bethany said firmly, along with addressing how my son was removed from the choir for raising valid concerns. Pastor Wesley had the grace to look ashamed. Of course, that was premature. It was wrong, Bethany corrected, and it sends a terrible message to the children about speaking truth to power. Theodore Hartman closed his ledger with a decisive snap. I'll conduct a full audit of the choir fund immediately. If there are irregularities, they will be addressed appropriately. He turned to Micah, his formal demeanor softening slightly. Thank you for your diligence, young man. Integrity isn't always rewarded immediately, but it's always the right choice. Micah felt a strange mixture of vindication and unease. He hadn't wanted to cause trouble. He just wanted things to be right. What about the choir? He asked in a small voice. Pastor Wesley cleared his throat. I think that's a conversation we should have with Miss Wilcott present. But I can assure you, Micah, that your position in the choir is secure if you wish to continue. Micah wasn't sure he did wish to continue, not if Charlotte remained in charge. The thought of facing her again made his stomach knot. As if reading his thoughts, his mother squeezed his shoulder. We don't need to decide anything tonight. Let's go home and pray about it. Josiah, who had remained a silent presence throughout the exchange, finally spoke. If I might make a suggestion, Pastor, tomorrow's Saturday. Perhaps we could gather everyone involved then. Give hearts a night to soften and minds a chance to consider. Pastor Wesley nodded, looking relieved at the suggestion. Wisdom as always, Josiah. 10 o'clock in my office? Arrangements made, Micah and his mother walked toward the exit. Before leaving, Micah turned back to Josiah. Thank you, he said simply. The custodian winked. Remember, young sir, voices raised for truth are never truly silenced. Their apartment felt emptier than usual that night. The spaces where his father should be yawning wide in the evening stillness. After a quiet dinner, Micah sat on his bed, staring at the choir music he'd been practicing. The solo part for Amazing Grace stared back at him, notes climbing and falling like the tumult in his heart. A soft knock preceded his mother's entrance, her hospital scrubs exchanged for worn pajamas, her hair damp from a shower. You should be asleep, she said, sitting beside him. Can't. Micah set the music aside. Mum, did I do something wrong? By telling? Bethany's arm wrapped around his narrow shoulders. No, sweetheart. You did something brave. There's a difference. It doesn't feel brave. It feels awful. That's often how it goes with doing the right thing, especially when you're the first one to do it. She kissed the top of his head. Your father would be so proud of you. The mention of his dad brought a fresh ache. I wish he was here. Me too. But he's serving others in his way, just like you're learning to do in yours. She picked up his choir music, her fingers tracing the notes. You know, your voice is a gift, Micah. Whatever happens tomorrow, don't let anyone silence it. After his mother left, Micah tried to pray, but the words tangled in his mind. Finally, he simply whispered, God, help me know what to do, before falling into an uneasy sleep filled with dreams of singing alone in an empty church. Saturday morning dawned bright and cold. Micah dressed carefully in his best non-church clothes, khakis and a blue button-down his grandmother had sent for Christmas. His mother wore the simple navy dress she reserved for parent-teacher conferences and important meetings. "Ready?" she asked as they stood at the apartment door. Micah nodded, though his insides quivered. St. Barnabas looked different on a Saturday. Quieter, more imposing, without the bustle of Sunday worshippers. As they approached the administrative offices, Micah was surprised to see Theodore Hartman already waiting outside Pastor Wesley's door, engaged in intense conversation with Josiah. Both men looked up as Micah and his mother approached. Mr. Hartman's expression was grave, but Josiah offered an encouraging smile. "Good morning," Bethany said, her nurse's calm firmly in place. "Are we the first to arrive?" "Almost," Theodore replied. "Pastor Wesley is inside with Miss Wilcott. They've been talking for some time." The door opened before Micah could ask any questions, revealing Pastor Wesley's tired face. "Please, come in. All of you." The pastor's office was crowded with Charlotte Wilcott occupying one chair, her normally perfect posture rigid with tension. Her gaze briefly met Micah's before sliding away. Pastor Wesley moved behind his desk while the others found seats. "Before we begin," Pastor Wesley said, "I want to acknowledge that this is a difficult situation for everyone. However, after examining the evidence Mr. Hartman has provided, it's clear there have been discrepancies in the choir fund accounting." Charlotte's hands twisted in her lap. "As I've explained, Pastor, those were administrative errors. Nothing intentional. Administrative errors spanning 3 years and 7 charity events." Theodore Hartman's voice was quiet but sharp. "My audit shows a pattern, Miss Wilcott, not isolated mistakes." Micah's eyes widened. This was bigger than he'd imagined. Pastor Wesley sighed heavily. "Charlotte has agreed to resign her position and make full restitution." The silence that followed was thick enough to touch. Micah felt his mother's hand cover his in support. "There's another matter we must address," Pastor Wesley continued, looking directly at Micah. "The way your concerns were handled was unconscionable. For that, I offer my sincere apology." Charlotte finally looked at Micah, her expression unreadable. "I also owe you an apology, Micah. My actions were indefensible." The words sounded rehearsed, lacking genuine remorse. But Micah nodded anyway. He didn't know what else to do. "Will the missing money be returned to the charities?" Bethany asked pointedly. "Yes," Theodore confirmed, "in full, with interest." Josiah, who had been silent until now, leaned forward. "And what about the choir children? They deserve some explanation for Micah's absence and return." Pastor Wesley looked uncomfortable. "We thought perhaps a simple announcement that there had been a misunderstanding." "The truth," Micah's voice surprised even himself. "They deserve the truth. Not all the details maybe, but that I was right to speak up when I saw something wrong." The adults exchanged glances, a current of unspoken communication passing between them. "The boy is right," Theodore finally said. "We cannot preach integrity from the pulpit and then hide from it in practice." Pastor Wesley nodded slowly. "You're right, both of you." He turned to Charlotte. "Miss Wilcott, I believe you have something to return to Micah?" Charlotte reached into her handbag and withdrew a folded paper. "Your solo part," she said, extending it toward him. "For tomorrow's service." Micah stared at the outstretched paper, a tumult of emotions coursing through him. Part of him wanted to refuse, to walk away from the choir entirely. Another part missed the joy of singing, of being part of something larger than himself. "You don't have to decide right now," his mother said softly. But Micah knew he did. This moment felt pivotal in a way his 11-year-old heart couldn't fully articulate but deeply understood. He accepted the paper. "Thank you, but I have a condition." Charlotte's eyebrows rose. "A condition?" "Yes, Naomi Parker knows what happened too. She was afraid to speak up, but she knew. I want her to share the solo with me." He looked at Pastor Wesley. It should be a duet. A brief smile crossed Theodore Hartman's face. Out of the mouths of babes. Pastor Wesley looked surprised, but nodded. I think that could be arranged. Miss Wilcott? She hesitated only briefly. Naomi has a lovely voice. It would work well as a duet. Then it's settled, Pastor Wesley said, standing to indicate the meeting was concluding. Theodore will contact the charities about the restitution. I'll speak with the children about the importance of honesty tomorrow, and Micah and Naomi will perform the solo, as a duet. As they filed out of the office, Josiah fell into step beside Micah. That was quite a suggestion, young sir. It seemed right, Micah said. Naomi wanted to tell the truth too. She just needed someone else to go first. The custodian nodded, understanding in his weathered face. That's often how courage works. One person steps forward, then others find their voice. He patted Micah's shoulder. Your voice will echo far beyond this church, I suspect. Sunday morning arrived with a crystalline clarity, sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows of St. Barnabas in kaleidoscopic patterns. Micah stood in the choir antechamber, adjusting his surplice with trembling fingers. The other choir members had been awkwardly polite when he arrived, clearly confused by his return. Naomi, however, had rushed to him with shining eyes. You were so brave, she'd whispered. Thank you for asking me to sing with you. Now she stood beside him, her small face solemn with concentration as they waited for their cue. Pastor Wesley had already spoken to the congregation about integrity and speaking truth in love, words that had caused several adults to shift uncomfortably in their seats. The organ introduction began, and Micah felt a momentary panic. What if his voice failed? What if the congregation could somehow see his fear? Remember, came Josiah's whisper from where he stood by the door, your voice is for truth now. Micah nodded, took a deep breath and stepped forward with Naomi. Their voices rose together, her high, clear soprano blending with his pure treble. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see. Something remarkable happened as they sang. The congregation, initially surprised by the unexpected duet, grew utterly still. Micah felt his fear melting away with each note, replaced by the simple joy of using his gift as it was intended, to glorify something greater than himself. By the final verse, their voices had grown in strength and confidence. When we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, we've no less days to sing God's praise than when we first begun. As the last note faded, there was a moment of profound silence before the congregation erupted in applause, something rarely done in the traditional Episcopal service. Micah caught sight of his mother in the third pew, tears streaming unashamedly down her face. After the service, as congregants filed out, many stopped to commend the young singers. Micah noticed several parents in hushed, serious conversation with Theodore Hartman and Pastor Wesley, occasionally glancing his way. You've started something, Josiah commented, appearing beside him with his ever-present peppermint. Truth has a way of rippling outward. Will things change now? Micah asked. Some will, some won't. But you've changed, and that's what matters most. Josiah's eyes crinkled. Your voice reached places you can't yet see. Later that afternoon, as Micah and his mother walked home through the park adjacent to St. Barnabas, his phone buzzed with a text. It was from his father, a rare treat given his limited communication opportunities during deployment. Heard about your courage, son. Standing for truth is never easy, but always right. So proud of you. Your voice is changing the world in ways mine never could. Micah stopped walking, rereading the message as tears blurred his vision. His mother, seeing his reaction, read over his shoulder. He's right, you know, she said softly. Micah nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Finally, he looked up at the church spire visible above the trees, thinking of the stained glass windows filtering light into beautiful patterns, light that appeared different depending on where you stood, but was fundamentally the same pure source. "I think I understand something now," he said slowly. "Our voices, they're like that light through the church windows. They can be beautiful just singing songs, but they're meant for more than that." Bethany squeezed his shoulder. "What are they meant for, do you think?" Micah thought about Naomi finding her courage, about the parents talking intently with Pastor Wesley, about Josiah's quiet wisdom and unwavering support. "They're meant to shine truth into dark places," he said, "even when it's hard, even when it costs something." As if in confirmation, the bells of St. Barnabas began to ring, their sound carrying across the park and beyond, echoing through the streets of Clearwell. Not a single voice, but many, creating something beautiful in their unity. Micah listened, feeling something settle in his heart, a certainty that though speaking truth had been difficult, it was what his voice was meant for, and no matter what challenges came next, that purpose would remain clear and true, echoing far beyond what he could currently imagine. "Ready to go home?" his mother asked when the bells fell silent. Micah nodded, tucking his phone away with his father's message safely delivered. "Yes. But tomorrow, I think we should visit the children's hospital. I'd like to sing for the kids there, if that's okay." Bethany smiled. "I think that's more than okay. It's perfect." They walked on together, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows before them, while behind them the church stood solid against the sky, its foundations strong, its windows gleaming, its truth enduring. The end,